British nurse Edith Cavell became well known for treating wounded soldiers from both sides of the conflict during the First World War. In 1914, after the Germans occupied Belgium, she and a group of people took a risk and created an underground network so the wounded Allied soldiers and military-aged civilians can escape from Belgium. They operated under the radar for almost a year and were later caught. For punishment, Cavell was executed by a firing squad for breaking German military law. Her death was quite significant. It sparked huge outrage worldwide, and it also became an iconic propaganda tool that was used to galvanize public opinion against the Germans during the war. Born in Zwaardeston in 1865, she was the eldest of the 4 children of Frederick Cavell and Louisa Sophia Warming. Her father was a vicar, and she grew up in a very religious household. Nursing wasn't her first career choice. After finishing school, she took a job as a governess in 1890 and worked for multiple wealthy families. By 1895, she returned home after she heard news that her father fell ill. After his recovery, Cavell made a life-changing decision to pursue a path in nursing. In 1896, she applied to become a nurse and worked under matron Eva Lux at the London hospital. Cavell showed great talent, and her colleagues were impressed. In September 1897, she was sent to Maidstone, a town located in Kent, southeast of England. The place was experiencing typhoid outbreak, a fatal infection that could lead to high fever, diarrhea, and vomiting. The disease is often transmitted by consumption of contaminated food or water. The town had a population of 34,000 residents, and 1,847 were infected. Under a year, medical personnel were able to contain it, and by January 1898, the outbreak ended with 132 deaths. She was one of the many who received the Maidstone Medal for her assistance during the town outbreak. By 1907, Dr. Antoine Depage, a well-known surgeon in Belgium, offered her a position to be the matron of the newly established nursing school in Brussels. At the time, the hospital was run mostly by nuns, and their medical practices were outdated. Cavell accepted the job and brought structure in the hospital. She greatly improved the management and the overall operation. She also taught multiple nurses who came from different parts of Europe and took them under her wing. After many years, Cavell became a senior figure in modern nursing in Belgium. On August 4, 1914, during the First World War, Germany launched a military campaign to force their way to neutral Belgium to attack France. Within hours, Britain declared war on Germany. Cavell felt that her help was needed more than ever. She traveled back to Brussels to aid the wounded. Her clinic was converted into a Red Cross hospital. She and a group of nurses treated injured soldiers from both sides. By late August, the Germans occupied Brussels, and it followed under the German military law. Even though she was British, they allowed her to continue her work so long as she abided with new rules. However, she did more than treat her patients' wounds. At that point, she knew that treating Allied soldiers wouldn't be enough. So she and a group of people set up an underground network so they could transport Allied soldiers and military-aged men to reach the Netherlands, a neutral country during World War I. This was a direct violation against the German law, and if caught, she would face serious consequences. Philippe Bach was the mastermind of the underground network. He organized the transportation and sent them to several secret houses at the northern border of Belgium. They were then given false papers so they could hide their identity and step foot in the Netherlands. From there, the soldiers could sail home to Britain. Their operation became suspicious. German authorities noticed that several wounded British soldiers went missing after being treated in the hospital. A member of the German secret police, Otto Mayer, was sent to the hospital to investigate the place. He questioned all the staff and patients. He observed their activities and how they ran things, and in the end, he found nothing. Marie de Croix, one of the staff members, grew concerned after the unexpected visit from the German secret police. She warned Cavell for possible future investigations and told her to stop the operation in fear of getting caught. Cavell refused to give in and stated that it was her duty to not only treat her patients, but also bring them to safety. Over the course of 11 months, she treated hundreds of wounded civilians and soldiers from both sides, smuggled over 200 Allied soldiers and military-aged civilians to the Netherlands. However, this all came to an end in August 1915. Georges Gaston Quin, a Frenchman, disguised himself as a soldier, approached the hospital and asked for their help to get him to safety. The staff agreed to help him, but little did they know, even though he was French, he sided with the Germans. The very next day, the hospital was raided. Cavell, along with the staff, were arrested. In court, she was prosecuted for smuggling Allied soldiers and civilians to the Netherlands. Cavell confessed everything. She told them that the underground network was her idea and she took full responsibility. In her own testimony, she said, "My preoccupation has not been to aid the enemy, but to help the men who applied to me to reach the frontier. Once across the frontier, they were free." Nonetheless, more than 30 people were arrested for imprisonment, but only 5 were sentenced to death. Edith Cavell, Philippe Bach, Louise Thuliez, a member of the underground network, Louis Severin, the apothecary who helped create the false papers, and Countess Jeanne de Belleville. However, 3 of them were reprieved. Cavell and Philippe were the only 2 people that faced the death penalty. They were found guilty of treason under the German military code, which at the time allowed foreigners to be convicted of treason. General von Sauersweg, the military governor of Brussels, insisted that the execution be taken immediately. He wanted to get it over with to prevent any higher authorities to appeal for clemency. On the morning of October 12, 1915, Edith Cavell and Philippe Bach were executed by a firing squad. The British government publicized her story as part of their propaganda efforts. Postcards were created featuring her execution, depicting the Germans as ruthless animals who killed defenseless women. They knew her death was the perfect propaganda tool. She was British, a nurse, and very religious. They portrayed her as an angelic figure. The posters they released were quite effective. Recruitment of soldiers doubled in numbers and gave them a bigger reason to fight against the Germans. Her story captured many because of her heroic approach to death. She died helping the wounded regardless of which side they were on. Although the public hailed her as a martyr, it is contrary to what she wanted. She didn't want to be remembered as a heroine or a martyr, but simply a nurse doing her duty. The night before her execution, she stated, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone." After the war, her body was returned to England for a memorial service at Westminster Abbey. Then later, she was reburied near the cathedral in Norwich. Now, as for the person who betrayed her, Georges Gaston Quin, he was convicted by the French court for his part in the betrayal of Edith Cavell to the Germans. There is much debate whether her execution was unwarranted. Moritz von Bissing, the Governor General of occupied Belgium at the time, claimed that her death was completely justified. Even though she was safeguarded by the First Geneva Convention, which ensured protection of medical personnel, she lost that privilege the moment she started transporting captured Allied soldiers from Belgium. Also, the Governor General suspected that Cavell was a British spy disguised as a nurse, though the British government denied this. A century later, in 2015, Stella Rimington, a former director of Britain's security service, uncovered new evidence that revealed that Cavell was indeed a spy. Several secret documents that were archived in Belgium showed that Cavell used several codes to pass along information to British intelligence. After digging further, it was unclear what Cavell's exact mission was. Rimington also mentioned that the codes that Cavell sent were quite messy, as if it were done by an amateur. Whether a nurse or a spy, Cavell dedicated her life in nursing and helped those who needed it the most. In 1920, to commemorate her bravery, a memorial of her was built in London. On the bottom, it had the inscription of Cavell's famous quote.